The conference room went silent when Bradford held up my presentation. "This revolutionary approach will save us millions," he announced, his voice booming with false confidence. I sat 3 chairs down, watching him click through slides I'd spent 6 months creating. My analytics framework, my data models, my late nights turned into his career victory. The board members nodded, impressed. Bradford's smile widened with each compliment. My hands gripped my notebook until my knuckles turned white. I was Theo Barnes, 31 years old, and I just watched my boss steal the biggest project of my career. The presentation ended with applause. Bradford soaked it in like sunshine, never once glancing my direction. When the executives filed out, he caught my eye for just a moment. His expression said everything I needed to know. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. My chest tightened, but I kept my face neutral. Getting angry wouldn't fix this. I needed something better than anger. I needed proof, strategy, and perfect timing. As Bradford collected his leather folder and headed toward his office, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to complain. I wasn't going to argue. I was going to document every single detail and wait for exactly the right moment. 3 months earlier, I'd been excited about work. My role as senior data analyst at Pinnacle Solutions meant solving complex problems for major clients. Our company specialized in supply chain optimization for manufacturing firms across the Midwest. I joined Pinnacle straight out of graduate school, drawn by their reputation for innovation. Bradford Kingston had seemed impressive during my interview. He talked about mentorship and growth opportunities with the kind of enthusiasm that made you believe he meant it. For the first year, everything seemed fine. I worked on smaller projects, learned the systems, and proved myself capable. Bradford occasionally praised my work in team meetings. I thought we had a good professional relationship. Then 6 months ago, everything changed. Bradford called me into his office on a Monday morning. Our biggest client, Westport Manufacturing, was threatening to leave. Their delivery accuracy had dropped below acceptable levels, costing them contracts. Bradford needed someone to develop a complete analytical solution. He looked directly at me. "Theo, I'm trusting you with this. It's high stakes, but I believe you can handle it." His confidence felt genuine. I accepted immediately, not realizing I was being set up. The Westport project consumed my life. I started arriving at the office by 6 in the morning and rarely left before 8 at night. My girlfriend, Casey, complained about my absence, but I promised it was temporary. This project could define my career. I dove into Westport's data with obsessive focus. Their shipping records revealed patterns nobody had noticed before. Delays weren't random. They clustered around specific suppliers, certain weather conditions, and particular transportation routes. I built predictive models that could forecast bottlenecks 3 weeks in advance. The accuracy rate exceeded anything I'd hoped for. 92% reliability in initial testing. I created visual dashboards that made complex data instantly understandable. Color-coded alerts showed exactly where problems would emerge and when. Implementation guides explained how Westport's team could use the system without technical expertise. I worked through weekends, refining every detail. Casey stopped calling as much. My apartment became a place where I slept between work sessions. But the results were worth it. By month 4, I had something remarkable. A complete framework that could revolutionize how Westport managed their supply chain. I documented everything meticulously. Process notes, methodology explanations, and training materials filled 3 binders on my desk. Bradford started showing unusual interest around month 5. He'd previously checked in weekly, offering vague encouragement without asking specifics. Suddenly, he wanted detailed updates. "Walk me through your methodology," he'd say, leaning forward with intense focus. I explained my analytical approaches, thinking he needed to understand for his own reporting to executives. He asked about data sources, algorithm designs, and implementation timelines. I answered everything openly. Why wouldn't I? He was my boss, and transparency seemed professional. He requested copies of my documentation. "Just want to make sure everything's properly backed up," he explained. I sent him files without hesitation. He started attending my meetings with the Westport team, something he'd never done before. During these sessions, he mostly listened, occasionally asking questions that seemed designed to demonstrate his involvement. Looking back, I should have noticed the pattern. Bradford was learning my project inside and out, absorbing details he could later present as his own insights. But I was too focused on perfecting the work to recognize his strategy. I trusted him because I'd never had reason not to. That trust would cost me everything I'd worked for. The final presentation was scheduled for a Tuesday in October. Bradford called me into his office the Friday before. "Theo, excellent work on Westport. The board wants a full presentation next week." My heart jumped. This was my moment. Recognition from top executives could mean promotion, bonus, career acceleration. "I'll prepare the slide deck this weekend," I said, already planning my approach. Bradford's expression shifted slightly. "Actually, I'll handle the presentation myself. You've done the technical work beautifully, but board presentations require a certain level of experience. They expect to hear from department leadership." The words hit me like cold water. "But it's my project, my analysis, my framework. And you'll get full credit in the documentation," Bradford said smoothly. "This isn't about recognition, Theo. It's about effective communication at the executive level. You'll be there. You can answer technical questions if needed." Something in his tone warned me not to push further. I nodded stiffly and left his office. That weekend, I prepared detailed notes anyway. If Bradford was presenting my work, he'd need my documentation to do it justice. I spent Sunday creating a comprehensive guide to every aspect of the project. Monday morning, I emailed everything to Bradford. He replied with a brief thanks. Tuesday arrived with the kind of bright autumn weather that should have felt hopeful. Instead, I felt mounting dread as I walked into Pinnacle's headquarters. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. I arrived early wearing my best suit. Bradford was already in the conference room, setting up his laptop. The slides on screen were mine, but reformatted. He'd removed my name from every page. Where my original deck had credited analysis by Theo Barnes, his version simply said, "Pinnacle Solutions Analytics Department." I stood in the doorway staring at the screen. Bradford noticed me and smiled. "Morning, Theo. Thanks again for the background materials. Very helpful." The board members began arriving. Chairman Walsh, CFO Brennan, Operations Director Carmichael, and 3 others I recognized from company events. They took seats around the long table, coffee cups in hand, ready to be impressed. I sat near the back, positioned where I could see both the screen and Bradford's face. My phone was in my pocket recording audio. Not because I'd planned this, but because I'd started recording all my meetings with Bradford 2 weeks earlier. Something about his increased interest had felt wrong. Bradford began speaking, and my stomach dropped. He wasn't just presenting my work. He was claiming he'd personally developed every element. "When I first analyzed Westport's data, I noticed patterns others had missed," he said confidently. "I designed a predictive framework that could forecast supply chain bottlenecks with 92% accuracy. Every sentence was a theft. Every insight he described as his own insight was mine." He clicked through my slides explaining my methodology as though he'd created it himself. The board members asked questions. Bradford answered smoothly, using information from the documentation I'd provided. He never stumbled, never hesitated. His preparation was thorough because he had my complete written explanations. Chairman Walsh leaned forward. "Bradford, this is extraordinary work. How long did this take you?" "About 6 months of intensive development," Bradford replied without missing a beat. "Nights and weekends, but that's what leadership requires." I felt physically sick. Casey had accused me of neglecting our relationship for this project. I'd missed her birthday, canceled weekend plans, and skipped my brother's wedding rehearsal dinner. All for work that Bradford was now claiming as his own achievement. The presentation continued for 40 minutes. When it ended, the board erupted in applause. Chairman Walsh stood, extending his hand to Bradford. "Outstanding work. This could transform our competitive position. I'm recommending you for immediate promotion to Vice President of Analytics." Bradford shook his hand with practiced humility. Thank you, sir. I believe in pushing boundaries and delivering results. They discussed implementation timelines and client expansion possibilities. Bradford suggested bringing the framework to other clients, potentially generating millions in additional revenue. He spoke with authority about systems he hadn't built and strategies he hadn't developed. CFO Brennan turned to me. Theo, you worked with Bradford on this, correct? Finally, acknowledgement. I opened my mouth to speak, but Bradford answered first. Theo provided valuable data entry support and helped with some preliminary research. Good team player. Data entry support. 6 months of my life reduced to clerical work. My hands clenched under the table. I forced myself to breathe slowly, maintaining composure. Yes, sir, I said quietly. I was involved in the project. Brennan nodded and turned back to Bradford, already losing interest in the junior analyst who'd merely helped. The meeting concluded with handshakes and congratulations directed entirely at Bradford. He accepted everything graciously, promising detailed implementation plans by the end of the week. I left the conference room and walked straight to my desk. My hands shook as I sat down. Rage and disbelief competed for dominance in my chest. Around me, colleagues worked normally, unaware that my career had just been stolen. I opened my desk drawer where I kept backup drives of all my projects. The Westport files were there, time-stamped and complete. Every version of every document showing my name as the creator. I had proof. The question was what to do with it. Going to HR seemed like the obvious choice. But Bradford was a senior director with 8 years at Pinnacle. I was a junior analyst who'd been there less than 3 years. Who would they believe? If I complained and failed, Bradford would find ways to push me out. Bad performance reviews, impossible projects, gradual marginalization until I quit or was fired. I'd seen it happen to others who challenged management. My phone buzzed. Casey was calling, probably wondering why I'd been so distant lately. I let it go to voicemail. I couldn't talk to her right now, not when my thoughts were this chaotic. I needed a strategy, not an emotional outburst. Bradford walked past my desk, riding high on his stolen victory. He didn't even glance my way. That evening, I met my friend Vincent at a bar near my apartment. Vincent worked in corporate law, specializing in employment disputes. We'd been friends since college, and I trusted his judgment completely. I explained everything over beer and pretzels. Vincent listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly serious. When I finished, he sat back and rubbed his temples. That's textbook intellectual property theft, he said. But proving it in a way that protects you is complicated. Bradford has institutional power. You're junior level. The system favors him. So I'm supposed to just accept this? My voice came out harder than intended. No, but you need to be smart. Document everything. Every email, every meeting, every interaction. Build an undeniable case before you make any moves. He pulled out his phone and opened a notes app. Let's think strategically. What's Bradford's weakness? I considered the question. Bradford was charismatic and well-connected, but his technical knowledge had always been superficial. He relied on his team's expertise because he didn't actually understand complex analytics himself. He doesn't really know how the system works, I said slowly. He can present it because I gave him documentation. But if someone asked him to explain the underlying methodology without his notes, he'd struggle. Vincent's eyes lit up. That's your opening. You need to create a situation where Bradford has to demonstrate technical expertise he doesn't possess, where he can't rely on prepared materials or your documentation. We spent the next hour planning. The strategy was risky but possible. I needed to arrange circumstances where Bradford would be forced to answer unexpected technical questions in front of people who mattered. If he failed publicly, it would raise questions about his claims of personal development. The key was making it happen naturally, without obvious manipulation. If Bradford suspected I was setting him up, he'd find ways to avoid the situation or prepare extensively. You'll need an ally inside the executive level, Vincent said. Someone who can ask the right questions without knowing they're part of your plan. I thought about the board members. Most were Bradford's allies or at least neutral. But CFO Brennan had a reputation for detail-oriented analysis. He'd built his career on identifying inconsistencies in financial reports. If anyone would notice gaps in Bradford's technical knowledge, it would be him. Brennan, I said. He asks probing questions. If I could get him interested in the technical specifics, he might push Bradford in ways that expose the truth. Vincent nodded. How do you reach Brennan without going through Bradford? The next morning, I arrived at the office with renewed purpose. Instead of sulking, I threw myself into other projects with visible enthusiasm. I wanted Bradford to think I'd accepted my role as background support. At lunch, I casually asked our office manager about upcoming company events. She mentioned the quarterly strategy forum scheduled for next month. All department heads presented updates, and board members attended to stay informed about operational progress. Does Brennan usually come to those? I asked, keeping my tone conversational. Every single one. He's obsessed with understanding the details behind department reports. Perfect. The strategy forum would be my opportunity. But I needed to ensure Bradford would be questioned about technical specifics he couldn't answer. That afternoon, I drafted an anonymous email to Brennan's office. Nothing accusatory, just a concerned employee suggesting that the analytics department's recent success deserved deeper examination. I mentioned that understanding the methodology behind the Westport project could help apply similar approaches across other departments. I sent it from a burner email account created specifically for this purpose. No way to trace it back to me. If Brennan took the bait, he'd ask Bradford for technical details at the forum. 3 weeks passed. I maintained my role perfectly, showing up early, working diligently, never indicating any resentment toward Bradford. He seemed satisfied that I'd accepted my place. He even praised my work on a smaller project during a team meeting, throwing me a bone to keep me compliant. Behind the scenes, I prepared meticulously. I reviewed every aspect of the Westport framework, ensuring I could explain any element in technical detail. I anticipated questions Brennan might ask and practiced clear, concise answers. I also gathered more documentation, emails showing I'd developed specific algorithms, timestamped files proving I'd created the original models, screenshots of my early drafts that showed concepts Bradford later presented. Everything was organized in a secure cloud folder with multiple backups. Casey and I finally had dinner together. She looked across the table with concern. You've been different lately, distant but also intense. What's going on? I wanted to tell her everything, but Vincent had warned me against involving anyone unnecessarily. Just work stress. Big projects wrapping up. It'll settle down soon. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. We spent the evening talking about her job at the hospital, her nursing stories providing a welcome distraction from my own workplace drama. The strategy forum arrived on a cold November morning. Department heads gathered in the main auditorium, preparing their presentations. Bradford looked confident, carrying his leather folder and chatting easily with other directors. I sat in the general employee section, just another analyst attending the quarterly update. Chairman Walsh opened the forum with comments about company growth and market position. Then individual department heads took turns presenting their progress. Bradford was scheduled fourth. When his turn came, he strode to the podium with the self-assurance of someone who believed his own lies. He launched into an overview of the analytics department's achievements, with the Westport project featured prominently. His presentation was polished, rehearsed to perfection. He described outcomes and benefits with practiced ease. The audience seemed impressed, nodding along as he spoke. Then Brennan raised his hand from the second row. Bradford paused mid-sentence. Yes, sir? Bradford, this Westport framework you've developed is remarkable. I'd like to understand the technical architecture more deeply. Walk us through your algorithm design process. Bradford's smile flickered for just a moment. Of course. The algorithm uses predictive modeling based on historical data patterns. Yes, but specifically what type of modeling? Regression analysis? Machine learning? What was your approach? Brennan's tone was curious, not hostile. He genuinely wanted to understand. Bradford shifted his weight slightly. We employed a comprehensive analytical approach that examined multiple variables simultaneously. It was a non-answer, the kind of vague response that sounds technical without actually saying anything. Brennan wasn't satisfied. But what specific statistical methods did you use? How did you handle data normalization across different supplier systems? I watched Bradford's face carefully. A thin line of sweat appeared on his forehead. The methodology involved advanced statistical techniques that our team implemented collaboratively. Your team? Brennan leaned forward. I thought you personally developed this framework. That's what you told the board last month. The room grew quieter. Other department heads sensed the shift in tone. Bradford was being challenged publicly, and his answers weren't holding up. I led the development personally, Bradford clarified quickly. The team provided support, but the core methodology was my design. Brennan pulled out a tablet. I've been reviewing the technical documentation you submitted. It's impressive, but I noticed something interesting. The writing style in the methodology section differs significantly from your usual reports. More detailed, more technically precise. Almost like it was written by someone else. My heart pounded. Brennan had done his homework. He'd compared writing styles and noticed the inconsistency. Bradford's composure was cracking. I assure you, all the work was done under my direct supervision and leadership. That's not what I asked, Brennan said, his voice sharper now. I asked if you personally developed the core methodology. Can you explain, right now, without notes, how your prediction algorithm handles seasonal variation in shipping patterns? The silence was absolute. Every person in the auditorium was watching Bradford struggle. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. The seasonal adjustments are calculated using standard deviation measurements against baseline performance metrics. It sounded good to a non-technical audience, but I knew it was nonsense. That's not how I'd handled seasonal variation at all. Brennan clearly recognized the answer as evasive. That's not a methodology. That's general terminology. I want specifics. Chairman Walsh intervened. Perhaps we should move this discussion offline. Bradford, why don't you schedule a detailed technical review with Brennan's office? Bradford nodded gratefully, seizing the escape route. Of course, I'll provide comprehensive documentation. But the damage was done. Doubt had been planted in front of everyone who mattered. As Bradford returned to his seat, I noticed executives whispering to each other. The perfect image had developed cracks. After the forum ended, I returned to my desk and waited. Within an hour, I received an email from Brennan's office requesting my presence for a meeting the following morning. The subject line read, Westport Project Technical Review. This was it. I replied confirming my attendance, keeping my tone professional and helpful. That evening, Vincent called. How did it go? Better than expected. Brennan questioned Bradford publicly, and Bradford fumbled. Now Brennan wants to meet with me tomorrow. Be careful, Vincent warned. This is your chance, but you need to present facts without seeming vindictive. Let the evidence speak for itself. I spent the night preparing, not rehearsing speeches, just reviewing my documentation and organizing my thoughts. I needed to be clear, factual, and calm. The next morning, I arrived at Brennan's office precisely on time. His assistant led me into a conference room where Brennan sat with two other people I didn't recognize. They introduced themselves as internal audit specialists. This was more serious than I'd anticipated. Brennan gestured for me to sit. Theo, thank you for coming. We're conducting a review of the Westport project development process. I have some questions about your involvement. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. I'm happy to help however I can, sir. Brennan opened a folder containing printed emails. According to Bradford's presentation, he personally developed the Westport analytical framework. However, I've reviewed metadata on the original documentation files. They show you as the creator, with timestamps spanning the entire 6-month development period. Can you explain this discrepancy? This was my moment. I could destroy Bradford right now with everything I knew. But Vincent's advice echoed in my mind. Facts, not emotion. Sir, I was the primary developer of the Westport framework. I designed the algorithms, created the predictive models, and wrote all the technical documentation. Bradford supervised the project in his capacity as department director, but the analytical work was mine. One of the audit specialists spoke up. "Do you have evidence supporting this claim?" I pulled out my tablet and opened my organized files. I have timestamped documents showing the complete development process. Early drafts, methodology notes, email correspondence, and version histories. All created by me on my workstation over the 6-month project timeline. I shared the files with them. They examined the evidence in silence, occasionally exchanging glances. The timestamps were undeniable. Every file showed my authorship, my account, my workstation ID. Brennan studied an email thread where I'd explained a complex algorithm to Bradford. "In this exchange, you're teaching Bradford how the system works. That doesn't sound like someone providing data entry support." I maintained my calm demeanor. Bradford asked for detailed explanations so he could report progress to executives. I provided comprehensive documentation to help him understand the work. "Did you ever explicitly tell Bradford that he shouldn't present this work as his own?" the audit specialist asked. "No, sir. When he told me he'd be presenting to the board instead of me, I assumed he would properly credit the development team. I didn't realize he would claim personal authorship until I attended the presentation." Brennan closed the folder and looked directly at me. "Why didn't you report this immediately?" This was the dangerous question. If I seemed too calculated, they might view me as manipulative rather than wronged. "Honestly, sir, I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. Bradford is a senior director with years at this company. I'm a junior analyst. I thought if I complained, it would be my word against his and I'd lose." The honesty seemed to resonate. Brennan nodded slowly. "We're going to need to interview Bradford. This is a serious allegation." "I understand, sir. I'm not making accusations. I'm just providing factual information about my work on the project." The meeting concluded with instructions to keep everything confidential while they investigated. I agreed and left the office, feeling both relieved and terrified. The next 3 days were torture. I went to work, performed my duties, and avoided any interaction with Bradford beyond basic professionalism. He seemed oblivious to the investigation happening behind the scenes. On Thursday afternoon, Bradford was summoned to Brennan's office. I watched him walk past my desk, still carrying that confident air. He was gone for 2 hours. When he returned, his face was ashen. He went straight to his office and closed the door. Rumors started spreading through the department within hours. People whispered about an investigation, about discrepancies in project attribution. By Friday morning, everyone knew something serious was happening. I kept my head down, focusing on my current assignments. Bradford didn't emerge from his office all day. The following Monday, I was called to a meeting with Human Resources, Brennan, and Chairman Walsh. My stomach churned as I entered the executive conference room. Walsh gestured for me to sit. "Theo, we've completed our investigation into the Westport project development. The evidence clearly shows you were the primary creator of the analytical framework that Bradford presented as his own work." Relief flooded through me, but I stayed quiet, letting him continue. "This represents a serious violation of professional ethics and company policy. We're taking immediate action." Walsh outlined the consequences. Bradford was being terminated for intellectual property theft and fraudulent misrepresentation. His promotion to vice president was rescinded. All projects under his supervision would be reviewed for similar issues. "We owe you an apology, Theo," Brennan added. "You did exceptional work that should have been properly recognized from the beginning. We failed you in that regard." I finally spoke. "Thank you for taking this seriously. I wasn't sure anyone would listen." Walsh leaned forward. "We're offering you Bradford's former position as Director of Analytics, effective immediately. The promotion comes with appropriate salary adjustment and a bonus compensating you for the work Bradford took credit for." The words felt surreal. Director of Analytics. The position I dreamed about was suddenly mine, not through years of gradual advancement, but through justice finally being served. "I accept," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside. Thank you for this opportunity. They discussed transition details and expectations. I would officially assume the role the following week. Bradford's termination would be announced that afternoon. The meeting ended with handshakes and congratulations. As I walked back to my desk, I felt lighter than I had in months. Justice wasn't always guaranteed, but sometimes, with evidence and patience, it actually worked. Bradford's termination was announced via company-wide email at 3 o'clock. The message was carefully worded, citing ethical violations, without providing specific details. Within minutes, speculation exploded across the office. Colleagues approached my desk, asking if I knew what happened. I deflected, saying only that I couldn't discuss personnel matters. By the end of the day, my promotion was announced. The reaction from my team was overwhelmingly positive. Many had suspected Bradford took credit for others' work but had never seen proof. One senior analyst, Patricia, stopped by my desk. I'm glad they finally caught him. He did the same thing to me 3 years ago on a different project. I didn't have the evidence you did, so nothing came of my complaint. Her words reminded me that Bradford's behavior had been a pattern, not an isolated incident. I'd been fortunate to document everything so thoroughly. That evening, I called Casey from the parking lot. Hey, sorry I've been so distant. Things have been complicated at work. I heard, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Your name is all over social media. People from Pinnacle are posting about the scandal. I groaned. It's spreading that fast? You're a hero to junior employees everywhere. The guy who stood up to a corrupt boss and won. The following week passed in a blur of transition meetings and handover sessions. I moved into Bradford's former office, which felt strange but satisfying. My first priority was reviewing all active projects to ensure proper attribution and eliminate any similar ethical issues. I discovered 2 other cases where Bradford had minimized team members' contributions in his reports. I immediately corrected the records and personally apologized to the analysts involved. Westport Manufacturing's CEO called to congratulate me on the promotion. We're glad to finally speak with the person who actually built our system, he said warmly. Bradford's departure doesn't concern us. We're working with you now. The framework I developed continued performing exceptionally. Westport's delivery accuracy improved 23% in the first quarter of implementation. Other clients requested similar systems, generating exactly the additional revenue Bradford had promised, except now I was the one developing and overseeing the work. Vincent took me out for celebratory drinks. You played it perfectly, he said, raising his glass. Patient, strategic, and you let the evidence do the talking. I couldn't have done it without your advice, I admitted. I wanted to explode in that first meeting, expose everything immediately. That would have failed. Bradford had institutional power. You needed to undermine that systematically. 3 months into my new role, I implemented changes throughout the analytics department. I created transparent attribution policies ensuring all team members received proper credit for their work. I established regular technical reviews where analysts presented their own projects directly to executives. I advocated for better compensation and advancement opportunities for junior staff. The department's morale improved noticeably. People felt valued and recognized, which translated into better work and higher retention. Casey and I were stronger than ever. With work stress resolved, I could finally be present in our relationship. We started planning a vacation, something I'd been too consumed with work to consider before. One afternoon, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The sender was Bradford. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The message was brief. You destroyed my career over something that happens all the time in corporate America. Enjoy your victory. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then deleted the email without responding. Bradford still didn't understand. This wasn't about revenge or corporate politics. It was about basic integrity and taking responsibility for your own achievements. He'd had every opportunity to do the right thing. He'd chosen differently. 6 months after everything exploded, I sat in the same conference room where Bradford had stolen my work. This time, I was presenting a new framework to the board, one I'd developed specifically for enterprise-wide implementation. Chairman Walsh, Brennan, and the other executives listened attentively as I explained the methodology, answered technical questions, and outlined implementation timelines. When I finished, Walsh stood and shook my hand. "Excellent work, Theo. This is exactly the kind of innovation that sets us apart." The applause was genuine this time, directed at the person who'd actually done the work. As the meeting concluded and executives filed out, Brennan pulled me aside. "You've exceeded every expectation. The board is discussing senior vice president positions. Your name came up." I thanked him, feeling genuine pride in what I'd accomplished through legitimate effort and ethical behavior. That evening, I stood in my office looking out at the city lights. The journey from betrayed analyst to department director had been brutal, but it taught me invaluable lessons about patience, strategy, and the importance of documentation. Bradford had thought he could coast on others' achievements forever. He'd been wrong. The truth had a way of emerging, especially when someone was willing to fight for it strategically rather than emotionally. My phone buzzed with a text from Casey. "Dinner tonight? I have something to celebrate." I smiled and replied yes, then locked my office and headed home to the life I'd almost sacrificed for work that nearly wasn't mine. Sometimes justice takes time, but when it finally arrives, it's worth the wait.